Imagine this vast, kind of intricate network, right? It connects factories to fashion runways, raw materials, all the way to the clothes we wear. Now, what happens if one really crucial thread in that global weave just snaps? The ripple effects can be huge, shaking an entire nation. And that's really the story we're digging into today. There's this significant shift happening, and it's poised to impact India's really dynamic ready-made garment industry, the RMG sector. Look, this isn't just about fashion trends or what's on the racks. It's about millions of livelihoods. It's about the stability of countless families, and honestly, a core pillar of India's whole economy. And there's a very specific date we need to talk about. August 27, 2025. That's the day the United States, which is a massive market for Indian garments, is set to implement a substantial new 50% tariff on these imports. This isn't some minor tweak. It's a policy that seems rooted in broader geopolitical stuff and the projections. They suggest it could nearly cut the industry's revenue growth in half. So our mission for this deep dive is to try and unravel this really complex situation.
We want to trace its origins, understand the immediate impact, but also the long-term consequences for India's garment makers. And, look at the wider economic and human side of it all. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's break down this tariff first, because the numbers themselves are where the shock really starts. Indian garment imports already had existing duties in the U.S. That's baseline. Then, on August 7, 2025, an extra 25% tariff got slapped on. And now, the big one. Effective August 27, 2025, 12 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, another hefty 50% tariff gets added. So you add all that up, the existing duties, that first 25%, this new 50%, and the total tariff jumps to, well, a staggering 61%.
Wow, 61%.
Yeah, and to give that some context, India's RMG sector, it generated about $16 billion in exports just last fiscal year. A third of that, roughly $5.3 billion, went straight to the U.S.
That's a huge dependence.
It is, and it's not just abstract money, right? This industry directly supports millions of people, especially through what they call MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises. These are the economic heartbeat of so many communities.
And what we're seeing right now, boots on the ground, is this frantic scramble. You've got factories in the big hubs like Tiruppur down in Tamil Nadu, Noida, and Uttar Pradesh. They're working flat out, round the clock. They're rushing Christmas orders, New Year orders, getting them out by air, by sea, anything to beat that August 27th deadline.
Right, trying to get ahead of it.
Exactly. We actually saw a temporary spike because of this. Textile and apparel shipments in July were up 5.4% compared to last year, and gem and jewelry exports, they were projected to jump 15% in August. Same reason, get it out before the deadline.
And there's a catch with the shipping, isn't there?
There is. A crucial one. For sea shipments, the goods have to physically land in the U.S. by September 16th to avoid these new tariffs.
Okay. Landing date, not shipping date.
Precisely. Anything arriving after September 16th gets hit with that higher duty. But the really critical question, the long-term one, is this sprint sustainable? Because after these deadlines pass, exporting to the U.S. just becomes prohibitively expensive for so many of these manufacturers. I heard one industry insider put it pretty bluntly: no exports unless the importer has huge margins.
Which, let's be honest, most retailers don't, especially in fast fashion.
Exactly. It's just not the reality for most of them.
Okay, so let's move beyond the raw numbers for a second and try to make this more tangible. Picture a small garment factory, maybe in Tiruppur, right? Stitching T-shirts for American retailers. Just a few weeks ago, that T-shirt going to the U.S. faced, what, a 13.9% tariff? Manageable, sort of? Suddenly, overnight, that same T-shirt is subject to 61%. It's almost an unimaginable cost jump.
It fundamentally changes the economics.
Completely. And the ripple effect seems pretty clear. U.S. retailers, they're always under pressure to keep consumer prices low. They just can't absorb that kind of increase. So their natural, probably unavoidable response: pivot. Look for cheaper alternatives from other countries.
And that's a direct, immediate threat to that factory in Tiruppur we were just talking about.
Yeah. So what does this do to their bottom line, their profitability?
Well, Crystal Ratings did an analysis. They look at over 120 RMG manufacturers, and their prediction is stark. For companies that rely heavily on the U.S. market, and some get over 40% of their revenue from the U.S. profit margins, could shrink by 300 to 500 basis points.
Okay, translate basis points for us.
Right. So 300 to 500 basis points means a 3 to 5 percentage point reduction in their overall profit margins.
That sounds like a massive hit, especially if margins are already tight.
They are. In this industry, margins are often very thin. So this isn't just some abstract number on a balance sheet. It translates directly into very real human consequences. We're talking about potentially reduced wages for Workers, layoffs, maybe even factories having to shut down completely.
And you mentioned Tiruppur being particularly vulnerable.
Extremely vulnerable. That cluster alone accounts for something like 30% of India's total RMG exports. 30%. So it's incredibly exposed to this shift away from the U.S. market. This squeeze, it's not just about company profits. It's a fundamental challenge to their competitiveness, and it impacts entire communities that depend on these factories.
Okay, we've got a handle on the immediate economic hit. But to really get why this is happening, why such a drastic move from the U.S., we need to look beyond just trade figures, don't we? What's the geopolitical angle here, particularly around India's energy choices?
That's absolutely central to it. These U.S. tariffs, they're directly linked to something called Executive Order 14329. It was issued back on August 6, 2025. And it's widely understood to be a direct response to India continuing to import Russian oil, despite the broader global tensions and sanctions efforts.
India's pushing back on that reasoning, right?
They are, quite strongly. India's perspective is basically that their oil trade is a necessity, driven by global market dynamics and their own energy needs. They often point out, look, other major importers, including the EU and even the US itself, are still buying various Russian commodities. So the Indian Foreign Ministry has been pretty clear, calling these tariffs unfair and unreasonable.
And this isn't exactly the first time we've seen trade friction like this between the U.S. and India. There's some history here.
Oh, absolutely. If you remember, the Trump administration back in 2019 labeled India the tariff king. Then, more recently, in 2024, called it a tariff abuser. So this latest move, it kind of builds on a series of reciprocal tariffs that were announced earlier this year. It's an escalation, but not totally out of the blue.
And despite this pressure, India's stance on Russian oil hasn't changed.
No, there's been no indication, no stated plans to cut those imports. And look, while there are ongoing talks for a bilateral trade agreement, a BTI, that people hope might conclude by late 2025.
Which could potentially use things.
Potentially long-term. But the immediate outlook for the garment industry remains, frankly, pretty grim. And you also see this broader geopolitical signaling, India reportedly halting plans to buy some new U.S. weapons and aircraft.
Okay. So a strategic pushback.
Exactly. It signals India's resolve, but for the garment folks, it might make negotiating these specific tariffs away even harder. It could prolong the pain for those manufacturers caught in the middle.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly and compare India's situation now to its competitors. Because that 61% tariff doesn't exist in a vacuum. How does it stack up against other major garment exporters?
That's where the disadvantage becomes painfully clear. India's exports face this massive 61% tariff wall in the U.S. Now, contrast that with Bangladesh and Vietnam.
Key competitors.
Huge competitors in the global garment trade. They face U.S. tariffs of just 31%.
31 versus 61. That's a 30 percentage point difference.
Exactly. It's enormous.
Yeah.
That kind of price differential, maybe 30–35% in some product categories, just makes Indian garments uncompetitive overnight.
So who picks up the slack?
Well, a report from the Global Trade Research Initiative, GTRI, basically warned about this. They said alternative suppliers think China, Vietnam again, maybe Mexico, are perfectly positioned to capture that market share India is losing. And the insight here isn't just that buyers will look elsewhere. It's that for these big retailers like your Walmarts or Targets, once they realign their supply chains.
Which takes time and money.
Right. It takes significant investment. Once they do that, there's huge inertia. They don't just flip back easily. So India isn't just losing orders now. It risks losing its place in these established global supply chains for a long time. Recovering from that is incredibly difficult.
Does this hit even the areas where India has traditionally been strong? Like you hear about value-added garments, intricate designs, skilled labor?
That's a really good point. India has carved out a niche there, producing higher quality, more specialized products. But the fear is that even that competitive edge might not be enough to withstand the sheer weight of a 61% tariff. When buyers are under intense cost pressure, even quality and unique design can take a backseat to the bottom line price.
So the shift might take time, but the risk of losing contracts permanently is very real.
Very real. Once those buyers establish new relationships, new logistics in Vietnam or Bangladesh, coming back to India becomes a much bigger decision. It's costly and complex to switch again.
Okay, it sounds pretty bleak on the export front. Is there any good news, any silver lining amidst all these headwinds?
Well, there is a significant cushion, actually, and that's the domestic RMG market within India itself.
Ah, right, the home market.
Exactly. Domestic sales actually make up about 3/4, 75% of the entire sector's revenue, so it's the bigger piece of the pie. And that segment is expected to grow pretty steadily, maybe 8 to 10% this fiscal year.
What's driving that domestic growth?
A few things. India's overall economic growth helps, of course. Plus, there have been recent interest rate cuts, some tax reductions, all things that tend to boost consumer spending, including on clothes. Think about it like this. Imagine a family in Mumbai getting ready for Diwali, shopping for festive clothes. Their purchases, whether they're buying from a local shop or online, are directly helping to sustain the industry. It definitely cushions the blow from the U.S. tariffs to some extent.
Okay, so the domestic market offers some resilience. What about trying to replace the lost U.S. exports by selling more to other countries? Are there efforts to diversify?
Absolutely. That's a major focus now. Indian exporters are actively looking towards the European Union, the UK, and the United Arab Emirates. Combined, those regions already account for about 45% of India's RMG exports in the last fiscal year. So they're significant markets already.
And wasn't there some good news regarding the UK specifically?
Yes, potentially a real lifeline there. India recently concluded a free trade agreement, an FTA, with the UK, and that agreement is set to reduce tariffs on Indian garments going to the UK down to 0 over the coming months.
Euro tariffs. That could certainly help make up for some of the U.S. losses.
It could. It's definitely a positive development.
But diversification isn't always easy, is it? Especially for the smaller companies.
No, it's definitely not a simple switch. The challenges are pretty significant. It's not just about finding a new customer on the other side of the world. You have to build new business relationships from scratch. You need to navigate completely different regulatory standards. The EU, for instance, has very high environmental and labor standards that manufacturers need to meet.
Right. Compliance costs money and takes effort.
Exactly. And you're also competing against suppliers who are already established in those markets. It takes time, it takes resources, and honestly, many of the smaller MSMEs just don't have the capacity or the capital to pivot that quickly. We're already seeing projections, actually, that the U.S. share of India's total RMG exports is likely to drop. It was about 33% last fiscal year. This year, it could fall to somewhere between 20 and 25%.
So a noticeable shift away from the U.S. market is already anticipated.
Definitely. Diversification is happening, but it won't fully replace the U.S. market overnight.
We've seen the industry scrambling, the push for diversification. What about the Indian government? What are they doing proactively to respond to this crisis?
Well, the Ministry of Commerce has been quite active. They've rolled out what they're calling a 4-pillar strategy. It's specifically designed to try and shield exporters from these tariff headwinds. The focus is on things like improving export competitiveness generally, actively promoting trade diversification like we just discussed, and also trying to reduce dependence on imports for raw materials.
Can you give a concrete example of what they're doing?
Sure. One specific step was a temporary exemption on import duties for cotton. Cotton's a key raw material, obviously. This exemption was put in place from August 19th to September 30th, 2025. Before that, manufacturers faced an 11% duty on imported cotton. So removing that, even temporarily, helps ease their input costs.
And industry groups probably want that extended.
Oh, absolutely. They're pushing hard for that relief to be extended, especially because the sector has this really ambitious long-term goal, hitting $100 billion in textile exports by 2030. You need cost relief to help get there.
What about the broader message from the top? Prime Minister Modi often talks about unlimited self-reliance. How does that philosophy play into handling this specific crisis in the garment industry?
It's a really key piece of the government's narrative and strategy here. The emphasis on self-reliance encourages focusing more on domestic production, strengthening the home market we talked about, and actively seeking out alternative export markets beyond the U.S. It's framed not just as an economic adjustment, but as a strategic move. It's about safeguarding India's national interests, reducing vulnerability by lessening reliance on any single potentially volatile major market like the U.S.
So it's about building long-term economic sovereignty.
Exactly, which indirectly pushes the industry towards becoming more resilient overall. Now, alongside that, you also have industry leaders calling for more direct, immediate support. Things like asking banks to be more flexible with loan repayments for exporters who are suddenly facing cash flow problems.
Makes sense.
And while some economic analysts suggest the overall impact on India's huge economy might be manageable, even if specific sectors are hit hard. For the textile industry itself, which is so labor-intensive, the pain is undeniable and requires focused attention.
And that brings us to the really crucial point. This isn't just about trade statistics or policy debates. It's fundamentally about real people, their jobs, their futures. The human cost of these tariffs seems potentially profound. Millions of jobs are potentially at stake, right? especially for women and workers in rural areas who make up a huge part of the garment workforce.
That's the most concerning aspect, absolutely.
Think about a place like Badawi in Uttar Pradesh. It's a major center for carpet making. Apparently, something like 98% of what they make is exported. 98%.
Wow.
And 60% of that goes directly to the U.S. So for them, this 50% tariff isn't just a problem, it could be devastating. You hear fears that a lot of people will be unemployed.
A whole industry potentially wiped out.
It feels that way, and you hear similar worries echoing from Tiruppur. Tens of thousands of workers, often low-skilled, facing incredibly uncertain futures. Where do they go if these factories scale back or close? There often aren't many other job prospects nearby.
And the ripple effects, they spread much wider than just the factory floor, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. You've got the suppliers of raw materials, cotton farmers, yarn producers. You've got the logistics companies, truckers, shipping agents. Countless small vendors who sell food or supplies near the factories. They all depend on this ecosystem.
It's a whole network. And analysts are actually putting numbers on this broader impact. They're warning that a significant drop in exports to the U.S. GTRI projected that 40–50% drop we mentioned could potentially shave half a percentage point, 0.5%, off India's overall GDP growth.
0.5% of GDP is significant for a national economy.
It is. It affects everything from foreign exchange earnings, which impacts the value of the rupee, to overall consumer confidence across the board.
We've even seen the stock market react already, haven't we?
We have. Shares of some of the big publicly listed textile exporters, companies like Vardman Textiles, Wellspun India, Pearl Global, they took noticeable hits when this news broke. It reflects broad investor concern about the industry's ability to navigate this storm.
So for a company like Wellspun, which I think has a big share of the U.S. dead sheet market, what are their options? What strategies do they need to pursue?
That's the critical question facing companies like Wellspun, which, yes, has about an 18% share of the U.S. bedsheet market, a huge player. They're at a real crossroads. They basically have to reinvent themselves, and quickly. That could mean aggressive cost cutting wherever possible. It could mean doubling down on innovation, new products, more efficient processes. But most likely it means a major push to find and develop entirely new markets to replace that U.S. volume. It demands strategic vision, but also really swift action.
And zooming out one last time to the really big picture, India's total merchandise exports to the U.S. last fiscal year were around $86.5 billion. If these tariffs hit hard across multiple sectors, that number could potentially drop by, 43%? Down to maybe $49.6 billion in fiscal 2026.
That's the kind of broader impact some projections suggest is possible if the tariffs remain and significantly curb trade.
And that kind of drop would inevitably put more pressure on the Indian rupee, wouldn't it? It's
Yeah.
already around 87.95 to the dollar.
Absolutely. Fewer export dollars coming in weakens the rupee. That, in turn, makes imports more expensive for India, everything from oil to electronics, and can also strain government finances. It creates a challenging macroeconomic picture.
So as that August 27th deadline looms, literally just days away now, India's garment industry is clearly at this incredibly pivotal, challenging moment. These tariffs are, well, a stark reminder of the risks that come with relying too heavily on any single export market, no matter how large.
Definitely a wake-up call.
The path forward seems clear, even if it's difficult. Diversifying exports, really bolstering that domestic demand we talked about, and just continuously investing in competitiveness, better quality, efficiency, design, those seem absolutely critical to weathering this storm.
The government's four-pillar strategy, that UK FTA we mentioned, those are positive steps, certainly. But they aren't instant fixes. It will take sustained effort.
So for the exporters themselves, what's the key takeaway? Innovation as a lifeline.
I think innovation is absolutely crucial now. It's not just a nice to have. It's essential for survival and growth. For example, really embracing sustainable practices, using eco-friendly fabrics, investing in energy-efficient production that could significantly appeal to European buyers, who often prioritize those things much more than U.S. buyers have historically.
Playing to the strengths of new target markets.
Exactly. Also investing in technology, streamlining supply chains, using data better, improving product quality even further. India does have that inherent strength in value-added garments, the more complex items. The challenge now is to pivot that strength decisively and quickly towards these new opportunities in Europe, the UK, the UAE, and elsewhere.
Ultimately, it feels like for those countless workers in Tiruppur, the skilled artisans maybe making carpets in Badawi, the entrepreneurs running factories in Noida, the choice is pretty stark, isn't it? It's adapt, diversify, or risk being left behind in what feels like a rapidly shifting global trade landscape.
That sums it up well. Adaptability and diversification are the names of the game now.
So reflecting on all this, here's something to think about. What stands out to you, our listener, about how nations try to balance this need for global economic integration with protecting their own national sovereignty, especially when they face these kinds of external pressures? And maybe what does this whole deep dive into India's garment industry suggest about the future of global trade itself? Is this a sign of more fragmentation to come?